Dell's Inspiron 3000 series is about as old as the dinosaurs themselves. It's been around for a long time and it's kind of Dell's staple value-oriented laptop series. Today we've got the latest iteration of it. So the laptop we have here is rocking Intel's 1255U i7 chip. We have 16GB of DDR4 memory. We also have a modest 512GB solid-state drive on board, and yes, we do have Intel's integrated Iris Xe graphics. Additionally, we do have the slightly dated Wi-Fi 6 standard as well as Bluetooth 5.2 on board, and finally this is a 15-inch full HD display. Now, the thing I like about budget laptops is that they're actually more fun to review than high-end ones because manufacturers are kind of racing to put as many features as possible in a smaller price tag, usually anyway, or that's the perception they create, and we're going to see if Dell succeeds in doing so. So follow along, let's get started. As far as the unpackaging goes, this thing comes in a generic looking box that's about as exciting as your year-end tax paperwork. Now with that said, once you remove the content seals and open up the box, inside of course firstly you'll find the laptop in a ton of protective packaging. Once you remove all that, here it is. Now anyway, past that, you do have the inclusion of a 65-watt charging adapter. Now I know it's a budget laptop, but it would have been nice if they included USB-C, given it's 2022. But nonetheless, you do also have the inclusion of the wall outlet charging cable piece, and finally the quick start warranty and regulation information. Design-wise, the Inspiron 3000 has a full plastic body. However, it is sturdy and more composed compared to previous generations, which is always a good thing. Now, in terms of overall weight, this thing has an approximate weight of about 3.65 pounds, making it one of the lighter 15-inch laptops in this category, and that is great news. Now, starting with the top side of the laptop, like I mentioned, you have a plastic surface. You do have this rugged or rough texture going on. I kind of like it, though I don't like that this thing is a fingerprint magnet. It traps a lot of moisture, which kind of sucks. Now, you do have a shiny reflective Dell logo in the center, which is subtle but noticeable. The sides of this laptop is where you will find all the I/O port diversity. So on one side, you have the DC jack port. You have a basic HDMI 1.4 port, two USB-A super speed ports. On the other side, you'll find the good old headphone jack, you have one more USB-A port, and you have a full-sized SD card reader. Now, the fact that there's no USB-C ports on this computer in 2022, even though it's a budget machine, is kind of disappointing, but on the flip side, you do get a full-size SD card reader, so take it as you will. The bottom of this laptop is quite straightforward. You do have a hard plastic finish. Now, you'll notice you have a rather narrow air intake vent, which gives me great concern about the cardiovascular health of this machine. In other words, the thermal management, but more on that in a bit. You also have two petite speaker grills on either side, which of course means this is a bottom firing laptop. Sound test to follow as well. Unfolding this laptop reveals a plastic inner chassis with a texture similar to the rest of the laptop, but you do have a generous amount of palm rest space. You'll also notice you have a trackpad of respectable size as well here, though you do have a plastic surface finish, and there is a modest amount of flex, though not the worst I've seen on laptops in this category. Additionally, there is a little bit of tactility to the trackpad, but if we're being honest, it's not a great trackpad, but passable for, again, a laptop of this class. The keyboard actually had me surprised in a very good way. So you have well-labeled keycaps that have a decent amount of surface area. Additionally, the actual keystrokes have a good amount of key travel, and you have a nice tactile yet soft feel overall, and it's not a bad keyboard to type on. While it's far from being the best, it's definitely a passable and borderline enjoyable typing experience. Additionally, you do have backlighting over here with adjustable settings, and what I also appreciate is the fact that you do have a 10 keypad. A lot of 15-inch laptops don't have that anymore. I don't know why, but it's good to see it's still here. Generally speaking, I really think this is a good keyboard. By the way, that's the S keycap, and it stands for subscribe, which means if you're enjoying the content, truly consider subscribing to our channel. It genuinely helps me grow and means the world to me. But let's move onwards. Directly above the keyboard, you have the hinge, and if I'm being honest, it's of mediocre quality. There is a fair bit of wobble. The hinge can feel finicky sometimes, and it's loosely tuned, but gentle care should generally prevent long-term wear and tear. As far as display fitting is concerned, you do have a averagely thin chin at the bottom. The bezels are narrow enough to meet today's modern day standards, and you also have a averagely thin forehead at the top as well. Now, I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that you won't look any worse than you normally do on the webcam here. The bad news is you won't look any better either, because this is a bare bone rusty 720p webcam, which unfortunately continues to plague every single laptop pretty much in 2022, except for a handful of expensive ones. Now, the display on this laptop is of average quality, but it has one amazing trick up its sleeves. So while you have a standard resolution of 1920 by 1080 and an aspect ratio of 16 by 9, you have an impressive refresh rate of 120 Hz. I honestly did not expect this with a laptop of this category, and it creates for some great smooth fluid motion. Additionally, this is a IPS panel, which means you also have great viewing angles in general. And finally, you do have a matte finish, which makes a ever so slight difference in the amount of glare you'll see. Now, color accuracy wise, it's not great. You have a approximate 58% sRGB rating, which means colors look pretty fruitless. They're not gonna look flush, and they're just not all that good if you are using it for color sensitive activities like photo or video editing. Now, the real disappointment here is that 250 nits peak brightness capacity, which means while it's going to be okay in low light to mid light settings, if you are using this in bright daylight settings or outdoors, it's almost impossible to look at the screen with the sheer amount of glare that comes because the brightness just can't compensate for it. Keeping in mind, I do have the higher spec i7 16GB variant of this laptop. Your performance may vary a little bit. What I can tell you is that this is a very peppy machine. Day-to-day tasks like web browsing, Word document processing, or just watching videos is going to be a very smooth and nice experience. Even high-intensity activities like programming or coding, graphical designing, architecture work are all very much possible, and also a smooth experience thanks to that generous amount of RAM we have here. But even the most demanding of activities like 4K video editing are technically possible on this machine, again thanks to the peppy processing and as well as the RAM we have here. Now, as far as gaming goes, this machine is not designed for it, but casual gaming is very much possible, as games like Fortnite can run at a healthy 30 plus frames per second at medium settings at the native resolution. Take it down and you'll get even higher FPS. Thermals are a sticky situation. So under unrealistic peak loads, you can hit a maximum temperature of around 46 degrees Celsius, but more realistic sustained loads will yield around 42 degrees Celsius, which is still pretty warm, but not the worst I've seen. Now, no one on this planet works harder than the fan on this machine. I mean, it grinds. It can reach a peak noise of up to 51 decibels. That is in gaming laptop territory. And do anything more intensive than web browsing and you will trigger the fan. There is definitely a lot of need for improvement in the thermal management area here. That's one loud fan. As far as battery life is concerned, you'll get about 8 hours with the 54 watt per hour battery you have on here. Now, that's including tasks like general web browsing, doing some light photo editing, streaming full HD content, and other miscellaneous activities. Of course, your mileage will vary depending on what you're doing. Also, the speakers on here are actually pretty decent. So I found that at loud volume levels, you have a relatively low amount of distortion. And again, given what this laptop is, they're pretty good. Have a quick listen for yourself. Depending on where you are in the world, this laptop will have different configurations. In the US, for example, the i7 configuration is the base configuration, and it has a starting price of $900 for the specs you saw here today. Now, with that said, I think the Inspiron 3000 is a great laptop because it kind of makes the compromises in a very clear fashion. For example, Dell gives you a full plastic body and also compromises on stuff like the webcam and battery life, but in return, they give give you great performance, decent components, and surprisingly a 120Hz display, which makes the compromise feel fair. Now there is one major flaw, which is the thermal system on board. Like I mentioned, it does get fairly hot if you are doing intensive activities for prolonged periods of time. That could be a potential problem, but for general productivity with some degree of high capacity activities like gaming or editing, I still think this is a pretty darn good laptop, and in that capacity I can definitely recommend it. If you guys enjoyed the content, make sure you hit that like button and please consider subscribing to our channel. Like I said, it genuinely helps me grow. Thank you for watching. Catch you in the next one.